I didn't mean to stop it short, but there we go. You guys get the key, right? You get what I'm trying to say with this song? You understand I relate these songs to where we're going, right? Okay. Again, reminder, I had 2 emails over the weekend from this class of COVID positive tests. So we are starting the cycle again. That's a 2-week cycle. Mask in class. If you don't have them, get them. I've gone through 8 boxes so far. All right. This week we're moving on. We started talking about foundations and liberty and democracy and what it is that we're looking for, right? What it is, the ideals are, the principles are behind our founding, our style of government, because this is American federal government, so there's a reason we have things designed the way that they're designed, whether you think those are still working or whether you think the reason behind the design is good, we still have those reasons. So, in deference to that, you guys took an exam on Friday. How do you feel? Good. I like that. Some of you didn't take an exam on Friday, and you need to talk to your fellow if that is the case, because that's a problem. The vast majority of you, in fact, did take your exam on Friday. So good job, pat yourself on the back. First exam of the class over. Okay? Fellows are going to grade your essays, and I'll kind of peek in from here and there over the next 2 weeks. Some of them are already done, right? You got them back, which is great. All of you will have Killers of the Flower Moon back if you don't already by this Friday. So I think almost everybody has theirs back. There are a couple that I have to look in on and stuff like that, and a couple that we just got behind on. But we will finish that up by this Friday. But your fellows are amazing. They grade, and I appreciate it. And I don't look in as much as probably they would like me to. All right, I'm going to talk about the big sword. This is Bill Bishop. He's actually not a political scientist. He's a journalist who has become more trained in kind of political science techniques because of what he found and what he observed. All right. So when he was observing things, he observed some interesting trends. Now, one of you has actually already heard a little bit about this, but we're going to expand out a bit. Okay. So he writes about America's big divide, this partisanship problem that we've been talking about, polarization. How even though we still kind of have these same 2 parties that have been working together for the most part over the last 100 years, in the last 25 or so, that's become more and more difficult. Okay? There's some conventional wisdom about what causes polarization. Okay? It's elite-driven. It doesn't reflect what actual beliefs of real people are. And there's a lot of evidence for this. There's a lot of evidence that says, when we do, for example, polling, and I ask you about gun control, or I ask you about abortion, or I ask you about education funding, or I ask you about lots of things, there are pretty strong majorities that lean one way or the other or want a particular outcome. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about public opinion in general on Wednesday. That said, this conventional wisdom also that significant number of people stay in the same spot, but they don't move that much. And Morris Fiorina, who I highly respect, one of my favorite political scientists of all time, one of those rock star type political scientists, like Richard Fennell, okay? He says, this is the case. It's elites who are doing this to us. It's elites who are dividing us. Hill and Kasanovich in 2015 show some pretty good statistical research that also supports that. But there's also support for the other side, and a lot of it is built on the observations. That's where scientific inquiry starts, with an observation. The observations of Bill Bishop. It's citizen-driven is what he's going to argue. In the 1960s, people began moving much more often than they were before. And they're going to move based upon cultural affinity. And just so you know, I always ask about the big sword as a potential essay question on your next exam. I do, okay? And one of the things that people get hung up on is this, okay? People move not because they're Democrats and want to be next to Democrats, or Republicans want to be next to Republicans. They move because the place is calling to them. They feel an affinity to an area or a type of neighborhood, okay? And this polarization is a byproduct because we find that a lot of these things are connected. So thebigsort.com, you can look at it if you want. He has some updated research there. But I'm going to give you the long and the short of it, all right? The key is this: human psychology. You guys are saying this is political science, not psychology, but I'm telling you, it's related, okay? People flock to places of cultural comfort. People flock to places of cultural comfort. And so while we did have certainly some structural, institutional things that made different groups settle in different areas, you find that people are still continuing to move to those areas. Okay? They want to go where they feel comforted. You know, the kind of drinks they want, the kind of music they want, the kind of food they want, the kind of atmosphere they want, the kind of architecture they want. We have a political scientist who used to be the chair of our department of political science, who now teaches only in architecture. And he talks about how architecture itself shapes political discourse, right? It shapes that. And so architecture matters, and temperature matters. So I want you guys to think about this really quickly. So I'm going to go back. How many of you, if given your druthers, want to live in a place that has seasons? Well, a goodly number of you. You know, I would say about a third to a half. How many of you want warm weather? You don't care about seasons? Raise your hand. A goodly number of you. How many of you want cold weather? There you go. All right, a goodly number of you. How many of you want to live near a giant body of water, aka the ocean or a great lake? Okay. How many of you want to live in the mountains? How many of you want to live on the plains or the desert? The desert. All right. Okay. So there's a movie from the 90s that is, you know, my age, right? It's my age. It's called Singles, and you know, Janet, you're of the high plains. I always think about this whenever I ask, you know, where do you want to live? So yeah, there's some diversity there, right? Oklahoma has some of that stuff, but not all of that stuff. We do not have an ocean. We do not have, well, kind of some smallish mountains. We got those, right? But now I'm going to ask you another question. How many of you want to live in a city? That's a big number. How many of you want to live in like the suburbs, but really near a big city? Okay. How many of you want to live in the country as far away from anybody else, or mountains, right? From anybody else you can find? How many of you want to live in kind of a small town? Did any of you watch Gilmore Girls? Stars Hollow is the place where you want to live. Okay? All right, so these are different things. When we talk about cultural comfort, that's what we're talking about. My husband and I differ in this, right? I like a city. Like, I like it. I like being in a city. I don't mind that it's noisy. I don't mind that there's lots of people around. I like people. I also like being really near campus, like the thing I really like. So I think a lot of what I like about a city is walkability. The fact that I can get places. I can go pick up a loaf of bread down the corner. I can, you know, I can walk to my bar and teeter home, whatever that is, right? You know, I can go out to a restaurant that I really like where they know my name, where there's pasties always playing at the deli on Sundays, right? I mean, things like that, right? I mean, when we talk about what it is that we're comfortable with, that's going to be different. My husband does not like any of that. He does not want to be near people, exactly. He likes living in suburbs, right? He likes suburbs to be far away. He likes to drive his car places, okay? He likes for lawns to be manicured. He does not like to manicure our lawn, it should be noted, but, okay, that's what he likes, all right? And so we made kind of a compromise, which I think he won on. So I still get to live in Norman, but I don't get to live next to the university. At the same time, I don't live in Moore, which is, kind of more what he was thinking, right? Or South Oklahoma City, okay, in terms of that suburb. In 2014, we have this kind of discussion about political typology. Polarized wings, but a diverse middle. And part of that is this. Who are the people who are steadfast conservatives? Are they likely to be politically engaged? Yes. So among the general public, it's 12% of the general public, but it's 19% of the people who are politically engaged. The same thing with solid liberals. 15% of the general public, but 21% of the active. And then business conservatives, 10% of the general public, 17% of the active. So if we look at that, these are more swung to one side or the other. And so you have a more kind of right side swing. 36% of the people voting fall into that business conservative, steadfast conservative. Okay? And it's 22% of the population. Okay? So listen to what I'm saying about being participatory. If you say, hey, I'm not on the far left and I'm not on the far right, I think there ought to be some compromise, then you need to vote. You need to be active in politics, politically engaged. You need to show up places. You guys are saying, I got a lot of things to show up right now, like here I'm in class and stuff, man. And I get that, but believe me, you will never have more time in your life than you do right now. So start a habit, okay? There's some other things, and you guys can look through this, but I think that that's particularly interesting. You have 22% that are part of 22% of the population, but then 36% that are very active. That matters. Okay. All right. So when we talk about mobility, education, and affluence, if you have a college degree, that's you guys, right? Because you're going to finish out. You're tough. Those first couple, you guys are mainly not freshmen anyway, right? This is a class of older people. So you're definitely going to make it, right? The freshmen are looking at each other like, I don't know. Okay. You guys are fine. You guys are fine. But 3/4 of college graduates have moved at least once, and we're not talking to college, versus half of people who have a high school education. If you have a college degree, you're more likely to move longer distances. Some of you said to me you want to live in the mountains, or you want to live in the desert, or you want to live by the ocean or by a large body of water. Then do it. Graduate from college and go live where you want to live. Be happy. This is your life, remember? You move more often. And employment matters more. So if you get a job in Seattle, maybe you go to Seattle. If you get a job in Chicago, maybe go to Chicago. If you get a job in, Dallas, that's where you end up. And the most affluent in our society are also the most mobile. The ones most likely to move. Now, with high school education, if they do move, they're going to move within the same state generally. Maybe from a small town to another small town, or a small town to the big city, right? Okay. They're more likely to move only once. And I'm not talking about moving within a town. I'm talking about moving to a place and staying in that place. And employment is generally not a consideration to move, right? So they are thinking about things like, I want to live by the ocean, or I want to be in a city, or I want to be in the country, but they are not thinking about, where's my job going to take me next? We have some culturally based cleavages. okay? And that's religion and church, okay? We have a great number of denominations of Christianity in the United States. We also have a great number of denominations of the Jewish faith in the United States, and of Islam. And, Baha'i is less splintered, honestly. But, other things too. Buddhism. There are different ways for people to look at that, and that's part of that freedom of religion that we have, which is great. But it also means if I've been sitting in my church and I'm listening to the preacher, or I'm talking to people around me and I'm like, you know what? This doesn't fit me. Then what do? Do I stay in my church? No, I leave. I don't think of my church as a community in the same way. I think of my church as, I want to be in the place that is most like me. Okay? And so I want to be somewhere where I feel, or, I don't want to be there at all. Okay? This is what people do. In terms of lifestyle, I talked about my walking, my proximity to restaurants and shops, healthy pursuits, closeness to sporting events. Yes, I want to live within a mile of the University of Oklahoma. That makes me happy. Right? That would make me happy to do that. My husband would not. And so we live in Norman, but not within a mile of the university. But if I was choosing, and I have chosen in the past where it was only my choice, and I chose to live on College Avenue, or I chose to live, in different places where it was on Joby Street in Edinburgh, Texas, because that was close, because I could walk to the university. Okay? That's something I liked. Tribes, and by tribes I mean not just Native American tribes, which are also an important thing in terms of cultural affinity, but also tribes that we have built ourselves. So you go on farmersonly.com or christianmingle.com to find somebody to date, right? eHarmony, which is broader, or what are the other ones? Tinder, right, which is different. But
don't look at me.
You guys, I think my brother and sister-in-law met on a different one.
I just had that.
No, it was a long time ago. That didn't exist yet. But they met that way, right? So these things work. We all adore my sister-in-law. So, but the point is you pick, right? You don't try to meet somebody and see if maybe you're compatible. You choose these strictures and you say, okay, only people that fit here. Put your mask up over your nose, please. You only see those people. And even here at the University of Oklahoma, right, we do that to a certain extent. Right? We only date people that, what? First of all, we see, right? And so maybe that's at the university. That's one thing. But also, we may say, hey, I'm in the Panalytics system, and so I am only going to date within it. Right? I feel like there's some screaming that's going on that I like. Okay? It's possible. See? She's like, yeah, that's right. Okay. Alt-right and white nationalism, also people are forming tribes. So we have really low numbers of people who fit into this category in an area, but online, those numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And they feed on each other. So this extremism feeds on itself. Maybe I wouldn't have said that, or maybe I didn't quite think that, but my group does, and I'm down with that. Same thing with Bernie Bros, so on the left, where you have people kind of eating each other. Okay? Oh, stepped out of line. Must destroy. Right? We have some serious consequences politically for this. Politics becomes high stakes because it's what we are. It's what we value. It's not us making a judgment on some issues or some policy. It's our entire identity. And different opinions threaten our way of life. So think about that. Think about what that means. You guys are in classes right now where I'm certain in your labs you have already discovered that people have opinions that you do not have. Yes? I hope so. I hope you guys are all not monolithic. That's my phone. Sorry. So, in these classes, how do you treat each other? Do you instantly tune each other out? Because if you do, you're doing something that I don't want you to do, right? That is against the purpose of the class. And I'm not saying you have to change your mind and agree with this other person. What I am saying is you need to hear it. You need to hear it. That's democracy. That's freedom of speech. You need to hear it. And you need to understand that it's not a threat to your life. Right? We can have this discussion, and it does not mean that they are evil or immoral or dangerous. Gulfs exist between business conservatives and President Trump supporters on trade, immigration, and cultural issues. Why? What's the difference between business conservatives and President Trump supporters within the Republican Party? We're going to talk about the party soon. Yeah.
The business conservatives are they're economically conservative, but they're socially in the middle, whereas Trump supporters are far right on all these issues.
Okay, so economically conservative, all right? And so what that means, though, also is free trade, less regulation. Okay, that's what that means to be economically conservative. Okay, and you'll say, well, Democrats are that too. Yeah, we kind of have this agreement in the United States about, free trade and, less restrictions. Democrats like regulation a little bit more. Okay, business conservatives less so. But on social issues, they tend to be more moderate. They're not, very strong to the left. It's not necessarily even something they think that much about, but they do not align with the right on many of the stances that they take, okay? And so you have this kind of alliance, which is weird right now in the Republican Party, and it's dangerous for the Republican Party in terms of its continued viability, okay? In particular, because this strain of moderate conservatives, moderate social issues, conservative on economics, are also split now from Trump supporters on trade, who Trump supporters are generally against free trade. Okay, that's a big one. When we talk about immigration, business conservatives are in favor of immigration because it increases the labor pool, it increases the number of, the way that the economy works. Also, a lot of times, cheaper labor. And then cultural issues, like I said, it's more a moderate versus a more conservative on the right. So this gets really personal. In 1960, 5% of Republicans and 4% of Democrats would be upset if their child married someone of the opposite party. So 50 years ago. But in 2010, the same question was asked. I don't have more recent. We haven't asked this question again lately. But in 2010, 49% of Republicans and 33% of Democrats would be upset. How many of you think it's gone up in the last 10 years? Right? How many of you think that your parents would be upset if you married someone of the opposite party? Okay. How many of you had this conversation with your parents? A few? So what reinforces it? Media transformation. We're going to talk about the media in 3 weeks after Eric has finished his exams. By the way, everybody say good luck, Eric. His first exam is Friday. He's taking his PhD exams. Soon you'll have to call him doctor too. Right? Splintering of news outlets to cater to different views instead of news that reports the news with some editorials. usually on both sides, okay? Though papers tend to lean either left or right throughout history, okay? We have these news outlets that cater to different views on television, and this is not something television did at all. Television said, all right, we need to capture audiences. This is kind of a history thing. We need to capture audiences, and so what we're going to do is we're going to prove that we are journalists, and we are going to present the facts. Over your nose, please. We're going to present the facts, and we are going to be unimpeachable. So that means whenever Richard Nixon listens to Walter Cronkite say, it seems that the evidence is against the president and he should step down, Richard Nixon says, I resign. Because he knows that America is going to listen to Walter Cronkite and believe that he is telling the truth. But we have splintered our news so much that we don't even hear the other side. I have a colleague whose family is very different from her. And so that means her husband, but also her mother and father, and they all live in Pensacola, Florida. And she says that she comes home and hears the news from her husband, or goes and talks to her mom and dad, and it's completely different than the news she's been hearing all day. We have so splintered our news, we're not even listening or reading the same things anymore. So we did an experiment with different news stories. We put people into an MRI machine. And the Republican, people who said, I'm a Republican, I'm conservative, they played two different kinds of news stories. It was the same exact news story, but at the beginning, they said, this is Fox News, and they give the news story. And then to other people who are conservative in this MRI machine, because there's a study, right, so we have multiples, that's how we do this. They say, this is CNN, and give the news story. They do the same thing with liberals, right? People who say, I am liberal, and so they say, this is MSNBC, versus this is Fox News. And you see the same thing happen in both cases. If you are a conservative and you hear it is Fox News, then your brain opens up and you start listening. If you hear it as CNN, your brain shuts down and you don't even listen to the newscast. Your brain doesn't process it. And if you're liberal and you hear this is MSNBC, then your brain opens up and you listen. This is Fox News, shut down. We aren't even listening to each other. We're not putting the same news out there, but we can't even process it. Our brains are closing so much, so we're so focused on one side or the other that we're not able to process. And so one of the things I have you guys do later on is watch some different news stories from places you would not normally watch. And I really want you to do that. I want you to think about it. We also have an echo chamber problem with that. Because the more I say something and you agree with me, and then I say something and you agree with me, and we just keep saying things that we agree with, then it becomes an echo chamber. We only hear the same voices over and over again, and so we think that is the only way to look at it. And we become more extreme. We become more extreme as a result. This leads to advocacy organizations that recruit candidates that are extreme. They spend a lot of money running people as Republicans or Democrats that are more extreme, more polarized. Another thing that we did, we put people in an MRI and we showed them pictures of things. Because, hey, we like to experiment on people. Actually, we may do an experiment on you if you're okay with that. The conservative brain, easily disgusted, like you see blood and gore, you see the brain centers become disgusted. And bigger fear center, like a fearful thing, it sparks out more. The liberal brain, less so, they tend to have a bigger, like if you map the brain, bigger anterior cingulate cortex. which is logical reasoning. Which means that people are saying, look, I'm reacting to my emotions more with a conservative brain. And are you born that way? Do you develop it that way? Whereas I am listening more to logic with a liberal brain. Are you born that way? Do you develop it that way? We don't even know. Right? In 1976, these districts that are dark, okay, that are darkly covered here, they're counties. These are counties that swang. They were considered landslide counties. It's by 20 percentage points or more, so they won 60-40 or 65-35, either Gerald Ford or Jimmy Carter, right? These are swing counties in 1976. People are living in these counties, and these counties are pretty dramatically Republican, pretty dramatically Democratic. This is 2000. Guys, look at that one more time. 76, 2000. You think that there are more swing districts in 2020? There are. Or more landslide districts, sorry. The political consequences are stark. Homogenous groups grow more extreme. Okay, people who are only taught to college graduates who are college graduates become more extreme. People who only talk to people with a high school degree, they become more extreme. People who are fundamentalist in their religious belief, whatever, whether that be Christian or Islamic or whether that be Jewish, right? But people who are fundamentalists and only talk to fundamentalists become more extreme. Our views get reinforced over and over again, and they don't get challenged. Please pull your mask up. They get reinforced, and they don't get challenged. If we are not challenged, we do not grow. And I want to be very clear to you that ideologically, there are very valid points that are liberal, and there are very valid points that are moderate, and there are very valid points that are conservative. If we're not listening to them, then that's a problem. You in the back, do you not have a mask? Please go. If majorities grow, the minorities retreat. That means that we keep shrinking the opposition. We keep shrinking the opposition. So we don't hear any of the conflict. We do not hear any of those other sides. It's going to reduce participation. People who believe their vote doesn't matter because this is a Democratic district or this is a Republican district, and so they don't vote. Because what's the point? Then it just becomes more extreme and more extreme. But it also reduces participation among majorities. Because what's the point? You're going to win anyway. Eric's going to take attendance. Public opinion is complex and diverse. Just because I believe this on this issue does not mean that I believe all the things that a party believes on all the issues. But we tend to collapse it down and we make it simplistic. And it becomes very difficult to negotiate if it's right or wrong instead of, one way to do it versus another way to do it. Right? You can't compromise. We see people changing their attitudes to align with political parties. So, for example, in 2012, Mitt Romney made the statement that the biggest foreign policy enemy, the biggest foreign policy problem in the United States was Russia. 70% of Republicans cited Russia as a threat to U.S. domestic security. In 2017, people were asked the same question. 38% of Republicans said Russia was a threat to U.S. security. And that has to do with the fact that support for Russia was linked with then President Donald Trump. Look at that. People believe this. This is a threat. Oh, well, we've changed, so it's not a threat anymore. People align, whether they have believed this or before, with the party of their choice. If public opinion aligns on all dimensions, the other becomes enemy. Right? If you are a Republican and Democrats are enemies, if you are a Democrat and Republicans are enemies, you cannot get anything done. And it raises the stakes of politics. We're not talking about farm subsidies. We're not talking about minimum wage. We're not talking about child tax credit. We're not talking about, as my friend Jill talks about, the capital gains tax, right, as a key argument. Extreme districts means extreme Congress. If you look, in 1949, more than 50% of Democrats were moderates, 45% of Republicans, and it stays at about 40% until we get to late 1980s, right? And then we see a precipitous, in the early 90s, fall. A precipitous fall as both parties, the members of Congress, get more and more extreme. This leads to government deadlock, which means government can't do anything. So all the policies we're going to talk about that are good ideas, they can't take care of that because they can't talk to each other. The Senate has lost all but one moderate Dem, really two moderate Dems at this point. It's actually two. There's no national opinion. Local or district opinion is all that matters. And we don't look out for the greater good. It makes compromise really difficult. So let's do an experiment. Which of your home community are the people more like high church membership, Baptist, evangelicals, megachurches? Is it a rural community with a declining population? Is there a lot of gun ownership, hunters and 4-H signs, rodeos? Is it an ethnically homogeneous suburb? If this is closest to your area, in just a second, I want you to raise your hand when I say hey, okay? Or is it more closely like urban density, high-tech businesses, research parks, college and college towns, alternative bookstores, bike paths, arts districts, young single professionals, ethnic and racial diversity, new immigrants? If it's more like this, choose B. So here's my really quick thing. We're ahead, guys. And I'm sorry I don't have my shield today so that you can see my face better. But, Okay, so you guys raise your hand on this. Would you say A is what you're closer to, or B is what you're closer to? A, raise your hand. B, raise your hand. In each of these communities, you're going to see similar decision trees. You're going to have the same sort of echo thing. So my question for you is this. How do we bridge the divide? Which I will find in my thing here in just a second. There we go. Okay, so here's your poll. How do we bridge this divide? How do we bridge this divide? So I put 4 things up here. What do you guys think? Education, right? Any other suggestions? Civic groups. Civic groups. We'll talk about that later. Peter Scotch Bowl is coming up. Okay. Anything else? Any suggestions? All right, we got a minute and a half left on the poll. It looks like 153 of you have logged in. So if you have not logged in yet, do log in. 162, 163. Be sure to go out the back doors. We will be wearing masks in class for the next 2 weeks, so bring them. Until